to day 2 of this inquiry session. We're to continue today with the cross-examination of Mr. Wright, but before that a couple of announcements. Can I just make sure that everyone has turned off mobile phones and the like so they don't disturb us? I think our timetable today will be, from what we were talking about yesterday, will just be the further cross-examination of Mr. Wright. Perhaps in a moment Mr. Mackay will give us some indication of his approximate timings. Just before that, we've had a communication from Dr. Addison about her attendance at the inquiry, and we have asked her if she could give us some indication of when she might be available during the third week, beginning of October, so that she can attend and present her recognition. We'll let you know when we hear any more on that. Are there any points anybody wishes to raise this morning? Procedural points? Nothing? Mr. Mackay, are you able to give some indication as to your timings for today?
Really, sir, I'm still hoping to finish before the end of today. I'm certainly intending to do so if possible. It depends obviously on the nature of the answers and whether it's necessary to follow those answers up with additional questions.
Okay. Right, thank you. Well, in that case, if you'd like to continue.
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Wright. Mr. Wright, I'd like to turn today to World Heritage Site issues, and it might be useful if you could be provided with volumes 20 and 22, please.
That's core documents, is it?
Yes, the core documents are volumes 20 and 22, and I can give you core document references in a moment. Now, Mr. Wright, it's noted in your CV, or perhaps in your inquiry report, you're a member of ICOMOS, who, as we know, are advisors to UNESCO on World Heritage Site issues. I take it you accept immediately that their guidance and advice is worthy of attention.
Yes, indeed, and I uphold many of the conservation charters that come from that body, which I subscribe to and welcome.
Right. Can we then look, please, first of all, in the first phase of this cross-examination at what ICOMOS has said by way of guidance and advice in relation to this project, and then in the second phase, later today, we'll move to your response, which is your effort to settle disputes between yourself and other witnesses to the inquiry about the extent to which your methodology and approach complies with the ICOMOS guidelines. Do you follow? Thank you. Now, if we can begin then, please, with CD 518, which is in volume 22, CD 518, which is the ICOMOS guidance on HIAs of 2011. Do you have that document, CD 518?
Yes, I do. If you could give me a moment to find it.
So as I say, Mr. Wright, at this stage we're trying to establish general principles and so that you understand that we're taking the same thing from the key documents. Now, can we begin please on its electronic page 7, which is the beginning of the document under the heading Background, Part 1. And in the third paragraph, there's a paragraph beginning where formal evaluations are undertaken. Many of these make up use of procedures for environmental impact assessment. Whilst there is merit at looking at the experience of EIA, this is not likely to be immediately useful without some adaptation, which I think is a point you alluded to yesterday in your evidence. Is that right? He goes on to say EIA frequently disaggregates all the possible cultural heritage attributes and assesses impact on them separately through discrete receptors such as protected buildings, archaeological sites and specified viewpoints with their view cones, without applying the lens of OUV to the overall ensemble of attributes. A more global approach to the site is required, one directly linked to the expression of the site's OUV. And then if we look down to the heading World Heritage Context within which HI are undertaken, that's in bold at A, do you see that? World Heritage properties need to be seen as single entities that manifest OUV. Their OUV is reflected in the range of attributes, and in order to sustain OUV, it is those attributes that need to be protected. Thus, the HIA process needs to consider the impact of any proposed project or change on those attributes, both individually and collectively, rather than a standard range of receptors. Excuse me. So, do you agree then, Mr. Wright, that what is being assessed in an HIA is the attribute or attributes that convey the OUV of a World Heritage Site?
Yes, I would agree with that.
And that needs to be done in relation to the individual attributes and also those attributes collectively.
I would agree with that.
And therefore, it follows that the asset that is being assessed is not the viewpoint or the view from an individual viewpoint.
It is not the view as such. It is the assets that make up the part of the view that is being examined.
Indeed. So the view from a viewpoint is no more than a tool in identifying or illustrating the attributes held by a cultural heritage asset that convey OUV. Is that right?
It's one of the series of assessments that have to be made. In this case, we had to work with the viewpoints that we were given by CEC, which are part of the wider study for the city skyline, and some further viewpoints are added to that, as I've given in my evidence.
I understand, Mr. Wright, that there was discussion and agreement about viewpoints to be helpful for this purpose of this exercise, but what I'm putting to you is a more fundamental point, which I think you actually agree with, which is that fundamentally it is the attributes and the way in which they convey OUV which is the focus of the exercise, not the view or the impact on a view from a specified viewpoint. I'm sorry, you wouldn't disagree with that?
I wouldn't disagree with that. Yeah.
If you scan down the document, please, to its page 4 at the bottom left. It's marked as page 4. It's electronic page 10, I think. Yes. At 221 it said the assessment process is in essence very simple. What is the heritage at risk and why is it important? How does it contribute to OUV? Second part, how will change or a development proposal impact on OUV? And then third, how can these effects be avoided, reduced, rehabilitated or compensated? If you scan down please to 223, the basis for management and decision making is a good understanding of the WH property, its significance and OUV, its attributes and its context. The management plan will often be the important first step in building an ability to have a clear and effective impact assessments. Establishment of baseline data about the WH property and its condition is critical. So it's acknowledged there that the content of a management plan may only be an important first step in the overall analysis. Is that right?
Yes, I would agree with that.
And if we continue to scan down, please, to section 4, which is on page, electronic page 13. It must be page 7. I don't actually see a page number, but it must be page 7. Do you have section 4? at 4.1, 3 lines from the end of that paragraph, it says, it is necessary to capture and explain in clear text evidence of both tangible and intangible heritage attributes, and wherever possible, to relate the latter to the physical features which embody them. So it's not just the tangible attributes that an HIA has to identify, analyse and explain, it's also the intangible attributes. Is that right?
That's correct.
If we look to 4.7, please, it said that while the statement of outstanding universal value is an essential starting point, sometimes they're not detailed enough in terms of attributes to be directly useful to impact assessment work. Each property will need to be assessed, and where necessary, the attributes may need to be more specifically defined during the HIA process. So that's again a further acknowledgement that whilst the statement of outstanding universal value is obviously of importance, sometimes you need to look beyond that and understand more clearly what's relevant to an individual property. Is that right?
That's correct.
Moving to 4.9, we get some guidance on how that could be done. The production of location or theme maps or plan views is almost always needed to demonstrate the findings and issues raised. Spatial rendering is useful to show the disposition of attributes, the relationships between the attributes, which may be processes, and the associations attributes have, such as visual, historical, religious, communal, aesthetic, or evidential. It is necessary to link the attributes back to the components of the SOUV in a clear and readable manner, which does not oversimplify, but retains cultural or other complexities in synoptic statements or diagrams. And we'll come on later in the day to explore whether that's happened in your HIA. Lastly, moving to section 5 now, please, which is electronic page 14, page 8 of the document. There's advice on what's termed the defendable system for assessing or evaluating impact. And at 5.2 it said that there's sometimes a tendency to see impacts as primarily visual. While visual impacts are often very sensitive, a broad approach is needed, as outlined in the Commerce-Jan Declaration. Impacts may take many forms. They may be direct and indirect, cumulative, temporary and permanent, reversible or irreversible, visual, physical, social and cultural, even economic. So again, it's emphasising the need to understand properly what the attributes amount to and not just simply have a primarily visual impact assessment. Is that right?
That's correct.
Looking then, please, to the text, which is at electronic page 15, page 9 of the document. Here we have advice or guidance on what can be described as a matrix approach by identifying what the value of the attribute is, or the asset rather is, and then separately identifying the scale and severity of the change or impact against that heritage asset. Do you see that table at the bottom?
Yes.
And as I understand your approach, it's designed to mirror the essence of what's set out there. So, for example, for World Heritage properties, the value of very high is attributed where there are attributes which convey OUV. If you see the left-hand side of the table at the very top under value of heritage assets, is that right?
That's correct.
If we look at 5.10, it says the table above is a summary to aid assessment of impact. The HI report will need to show the assessment for each OUV attribute, for example, in a simple table, and demonstrate how the results of each individual or collective heritage attribute have been obtained. This could include qualitative as well as quantitative evaluation. Now that may be quite a task, but that's the guidance, isn't it? You're being asked to provide an assessment in relation to each OUV attribute. Is that right?
That's correct.
And further advice on assessing value, it can be found at Appendix 3A, which is page 20, electronic page 20 that is, and page 14 of the document. Now, first of all, Mr. Wright, this is simply like an example guide. It's not designed, it's not meant to be prescriptive as such, but I think as I understand your evidence, you take the view at least that your impact assessment does generally accord with the advice on value which is provided in the e-commerce guidelines. Is that right? In
general terms, yes, but there are broader considerations that are taken into account.
So if we look then to the table, it emphasises above the table, the following table is not intended to be exhaustive, but the grading of very high value deals with archaeology, built heritage, historic landscape, and then intangible cultural heritage or associations. Now, taking each, perhaps leaving archaeology to one side, dealing first of all with built heritage or historic urban landscapes, excuse me, the second paragraph under that column says individual attributes that convey OUV of the WH property. Now, you readily accepted yesterday that the Royal High School displays a number of attributes that convey OUV, and I take it that falls squarely within this description. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And indeed, the National Monument and Nelson's Monument would also fall within this description.
In terms of an assembly of monuments on Carlton Hill, that would be the case. As to whether Nelson's Monument does so individually in terms of its significance, certainly in terms of its prominence, it does. So as a collection of monuments, I would agree with that.
Thank you. And in terms of the historic landscape, likewise, we know that the Royal High School is obviously set within Carlton Hill, which is one of the gardens identified in the Newtown Gardens GDL, and do you also accept that that GDL also conveys the OUV of the WH property?
Yes, I agree with that.
And then finally, the last column, areas associated with intangible cultural heritage. Going back to the area that we discussed yesterday, do you also agree that the Royal High School and its immediate setting, in particular its relationship with the National Monument, is an area associated with the Enlightenment and therefore also conveys OUV?
Yes, I would say that it's not just the Enlightenment, but a whole series of factors that come into play on that, which are partly to do with science advancement and commemoration at a certain time in history which is being recorded here.
So there's more than one attribute being conveyed. Is that your point?
Yes, it's a multitude of things that have to be taken into account, and it's what that means to people looking at the site.
But we'll come on to explore your comment there later in the evidence, but I note you as saying that yes, that's fine. We'll come on to explore that further. But the point I'm trying to establish at the moment is that you accept quite readily that there are attributes within each of these three columns which are all entitled to be graded as having very high value. Yes?
Yes, that's correct.
Next, please, can we look at the UNESCO operational guidelines, which are CD 520.
So I wonder if you just repeat the reference again. I missed that.
CD 520, volume 22. And do you have that document, Mr. Wright? Can we just briefly note, as we're passing through the document, that at page 16, electronic page 16, which is also page 16 of the hard copy document, there's some text about the role of ECOMOS, which speaks for itself. If we could move on then, please, further into the document to electronic page 100, also page 100 of the hard copy document. So do you have page 100? Yes, thank you. And so at this point, there are some explanatory notes set out in how there should be how statements of outstanding universal value should be put together when nominating sites. Is that right? And we see some advice as to what a statement of outstanding universal value is and what it contains in the right-hand column of 3.3. Is that right? And I don't think the first paragraph is contentious at all. I don't think any of us is contentious, but when we look at the second paragraph, statements of outstanding universal value should be concise and are set out in a standard format. They should help to raise awareness regarding the value of the property, guide the assessment of its state of conservation and form protection and management. Once adopted by the committee, that statement of outstanding universal value is displayed at the property on the UNESCO World Heritage Centre's website. The main sections of a statement of universal value are the following. There's a brief synthesis, justification for criteria, statement of integrity, and then statement of authenticity, and lastly requirements for protection and management. And if you look further into the document at page 141 on the same theme, again, it's further guidance on what a statement of OUV should be. Excuse me. Do you have page 100? Sorry, 141. Do you have that? Third paragraph says that the statement of outstanding universal value should respect the following format: 2 A4 pages max. Now, I'm not sure actually the statement that's been adopted does rigidly adhere to that. It's slightly more than 2 pages, but not much. But the same point's being made. It's intended to be concise. Is that right?
That's how I would read that, yes.
Thank you. So can we turn to that document then, please? That's CD 491, also within volume 20. Do you have that document, CD 491?
Yes, I do.
And the foot of page 1, it says, the new town constructed between 1767 and 1890 is a collection of 7 new towns on the glacial plain to the north of the old town, is framed and articulated by an uncommonly high concentration of planned ensembles of ashlar face, world-class neoclassical buildings associated with renowned architects, including John and Robert Adams, William Chambers and William Playfair. Contained and integrated with the townscape are gardens designed to take full advantage of the topography while forming an extensive system of private and public open spaces. The new town is integrated with large green spaces. It covers a very large area of 3,288 hectares, is consistent to an unrivaled degree and survives virtually intact. Some of the finest public and commercial monuments of the new classical revival in Europe survive in the city, reflecting its continuing status as the capital of Scotland since 1437 and a major centre of thought and learning in the 18th century age of enlightenment, with its close cultural and political links with mainland Europe. Now, just to be clear, and again, I don't think this is any controversy, but just to be clear on your view, Mr. Wright, the fact that the Royal High School and that William Hamilton is not specifically mentioned within the statement of outstanding universal value it does not mean that it's not captured by that statement. Would you agree?
I would agree with that.
And indeed, anyone with an understanding such as your own of this area of Edinburgh and Carlton Hill would immediately think of the Hamilton Building if one was reading this statement of outstanding universal value.
Yes.
Can we please now turn then to Economist's position in relation to this proposal, or these proposals, CD 369, which is volume 7, CD 369. Do you have that document, CD 369? Now, the first part of this core document is the letter from Economist's chair, Peter Marsden, chair of the UK branch of Economist, in relation to the 2017 application. And if we look to the third paragraph, it says that we consider that all the reasons set out in our letter of 2nd October 2015 objecting to the original applications, that's the 2015 applications, still stand. This letter is attached for reference. Although modifications we made to the design, the revised proposals would in our view still seriously threaten the fusion of buildings and landscape that make up Carlton Hill, in turn the adverse impact on one of the key spatial attributes of OUV, and thus on the OUV of the old and new towns of Edinburgh World Heritage Site, would be considerable. And then into the next paragraph, in consequence, Economist UK objects to the revised application, view its potentially highly negative impact on OUV. So it's saying that insofar as the 2017 application is concerned, the issues previously identified in relation to the 2015 application still stand. Is that right? So then if we look at the issues raised in the letter of 2nd October, which is the next letter, and we look to the second page of that document, in the third paragraph, there's a paragraph beginning the nomination dossier. Do you see that?
Yes, I see that.
And taking this hopefully relatively briefly, it says that the nomination dossier also noted that some of the finest public and commercial monuments of the new classical revival in Europe survive in the city, and that's one of the statements I read to you a moment ago. These distinguished buildings are in visual and architectural terms hugely important components of the overall urban landscape. They also display strong messages. That's something we were discussing yesterday. As public buildings, individually and collectively, they reflect uses that provided or still provide public benefit, and they evoke the spirit of intellectualism that pervaded the city. These buildings are significant for more than their built form. They are also significant for what they stand for. Now, I don't think you take issue with that, but that's obviously something that Economist felt necessary to emphasise in their response to the 2015 applications. All right? Then moves on, so too the open spaces that contribute to the urban landscape of the city. These are also a key factor. So too are the open spaces that contribute to the urban landscape of the city. These are also a key factor in the way the city portrays ideas of the Enlightenment as a prosperous, affluent and above all confident city. Of these, Carlton Hill is, in the words of the nomination dossier, every bit as symbolic a location to Edinburgh as the castle, and carefully laid out for picturesque effect in classical rather than military garb. Carlton Hill brings together open space in the public buildings of the National Monument and the Observatory and Hopetown Monument and the Old Royal High School in one extraordinarily important ensemble. In the nomination dossier, the Old Royal High School is described as the noblest monument of the Scottish Revival, and perhaps the single building which most justified Edinburgh's epithet, Athens of the North. And there's more comment about the contribution that Carlton Hill makes to the OUV. So it's clear from the Economist response, as early as 2015 in relation to the 2015 application, that they were drawing the attention of the planning authority to the content of the nomination dossier as providing further detail about what the statement of OUV encapsulates. Is that right?
Can I ask if you're asking me to comment on those paragraphs, or just to agree they're there? Because the things that I don't agree with the content on. There are mistakes in what has been put forward there. In case you haven't, the inquiry hasn't spotted what the mistake is, it refers to the Hopetoun Monument.
So there's an error in that reference, but otherwise do you accept that the advice of the Commons is, first of all, their advice, you can't take issue with that, but secondly, it has substance?
I have to say that elements of that have substance in the form in which it is presented, and the mistakes which are clearly within these 3 paragraphs.
Excuse me, is that a mistake in the dossier, as far as you know, or just in this letter?
I think it's in the letter, as far as I can tell. I don't think it is in the inscription or in the other documentation, and I simply don't know how that has crept in here. But it shows to me that there's a lack of understanding of what the site is all about, as something as important as that suddenly appears in a paragraph in relation to this particular building, over which there is general agreement that this is it's a prominent building, and I've accepted that, which makes a contribution to the OUV.
So you've identified the reference to Hopetoun Monument as an error, but beyond that, are you saying there are other errors in the content of the... I'm not talking about their opinion, I'm talking about the issues that they're drawing attention to as derived from the nomination document. Are you saying there are further errors there?
There's clearly an error in the second line to which I draw your attention, which I think is probably a typing error more than anything else. I'd read that as being neoclassical. And if we can agree that that is the meaning of that particular term, then I would accept it on those grounds. But as you know full well, in terms of the last sentence in the second paragraph, I have taken issue with that, because I do not believe that it is a full description of what is found and the multicultural layers of what is seen on Carlton Hill. I think I've made that quite clear in my evidence. In terms of the other parts of the letter, I do accept that.
Just to be clear, Mr. Wright, when you say the second last line, of which paragraphs are you referring to?
I could read it out to you. Carefully laid out for picturesque effect. I have no disagreement with that. In classical rather than military garb, in making the connection between Carlton Hill and the castle upon the castle of Edinburgh.
I'm sorry, Mr. Wright, I'm just going to take this one step at a time. You've identified, first of all, an issue with an error in the being referenced to the Hopetoun Monument. Secondly, there's a typo where it says new instead of neo. And then there's a third point which you're trying to draw attention to. What's that point, and which part of the document you're referring to?
So we're looking at page 2.
It's page 2.
I think it's the 5th paragraph down, 4th paragraph down, which starts, so too are the open spaces. Is that the one?
No, if I could clarify what it is I'm referring to specifically. It's of these Carlton Hill in the world is, in the words of the nomination dossier, every bit as symbolic a location to Edinburgh as the castle, and carefully laid out to picturesque effect, in classical rather than military garb. That is what I do not believe is a full description of the of Carlton Hill.
So there are other aspects in addition to what's said. Is that the point you're making? It's not that you necessarily disagree with what's been said. It's just there are additional factors which you also would like to draw attention to and have done in your evidence.
I'm offering these as a correction to what is stated here, and I think the source of this particular quotation, where it comes from, has been reasonably well established, because it is in the Garden and Design Landscapes. That source is acknowledged. It comes from a book written by Charles McKean in 1992, in which he refers to this, and in a sense it is a glib portrayal of what the hill is all about. I think the work that I have done, and also the work that Mr. Lowry has done, I think has pointed to the fact that this is a much more varied landscape in terms of the history of the buildings that appear on it than something which is purely classical. The classical is important, and that clearly has overtones for the Athens of the North and whatever that may convey and the values that lie behind that. But equally the other buildings which are on the hill, and by that I am not distinguishing from the part of Carlton Hill which I believe this is referring to. My vision of Carlton Hill is greater than that, which I think is what contributes to the OUV. It's not simply an assembly of monuments and of buildings. It is also Regent Terrace, and it's also the western slopes of the hill on which other structures are found there. That is my concept of what Carlton Hill is all about.
Well, obliged to Mr. Wright for setting out in some detail what your position is, but I'm simply, in the first instance, trying to understand what you're taking issue with here. The Commerce Committee is expressly referring to the nomination document and is quoting certain passages from the nomination document. As I understand your position, you've identified two typos, effectively, and the third point, you've taken issue with a quotation, which is one point that's being made about the attributes of OUV. What you're saying is that is somewhat glib, and in fact there are other tiers of understanding. Is that what your position amounts to?
This is fundamental, sir, to the understanding of what the hill conveys.
Right,
what I'm relating here. It's not related to typos. The reference to a typo is simply to something which appears, which I think needs correction. I think we'd all agree on that. But I think there's a fundamental issue that lies behind this, and that's what I'm drawing the attention of the inquiry to.
Is it because of that, Mr. Wright, that you don't refer to the nomination document in your heritage impact assessment, or indeed in your inquiry report? Do you take issue with the authenticity and value of that document, or is that a document which, in your view, has fundamental errors?
It's a document of which I think you suggested to me, and from the evidence that you put forward to me in building up to this point, that it is a starting point to try and understand the site and its heritage. It can be no more than that, but I don't take issue with that, with the nomination document necessarily, and indeed I quoted from the statement of OUV, which is set out in full in the heritage statement, so that it is understood.
Mr. Wright, as you well understand better, almost better than anyone else in this room, there are other experts in this area, the nomination document is a different document from the statement of OUV. And as we've just established this morning, the statement of OUV is specifically designed to be concise, 2 pages or thereabouts. What Econos are emphasising is that if one looks at the nomination dossier, you'll get additional detail on these issues about the importance of the Enlightenment and so on. Now, for that reason, one would have thought that the nomination document would be at the very least a document that you were interested in, but we don't see it mentioned anywhere in your evidence. Is that right?
What it conveys has not been overlooked. It's been captured in the documents. There's not necessarily a direct reference to it, but that's not to say that it's been ignored.
And for your notes, sir, and given the witness's position, I don't think it's necessary to take you to the document, but I'll give you the notes. CD 485, volume 20, and the electronic page references are page 8, page 30, and page 29, where you'll find further detail about the Royal High School, neoclassicism, and that sort of issue. One other Commerce document, please, is document CD 486, which is also volume 20.
Sorry, what was that? What was the CD number?
CD 486. It's volume 20. And this is the advisory body evaluation. Now, just to understand how the process works in hopefully a relatively simple term, once a state party nominates a site as a World Heritage Site and puts together the nomination dossier, the advisory body, the international part of the Commons, is then asked to evaluate that the case for nomination and then report to the Commons. Is that right? In relatively simple terms.
Can I ask what it is you're asking me to agree to?
Simply that's a summary of how the process works in a phased approach, if you like. There's a nomination dossier put together. The advisory body then prepares an evaluation, which is what we have in front of us, which then basically assesses the case that's being made for inclusion in the list, and then recommendations are made to Commons. Is that right?
I'm not an expert of the way in which the machinery of ICOMOS and UNESCO works in terms of nominations, so I can only assume that it is correct.
I'm corrected to an extent that the recommendation go to UNESCO rather than ICOMOS. Anyway, let's have a look at the evaluation and just, again, be clear as to what is said. If you look to page 79 of the document, when the advisory body is looking at the history, in the last paragraph it says, although the original idea was that the new town should be a purely residential suburb, it rapidly proved to be attractive to business and government and rapidly drew this element of the city away from the old town. It was to become the location for some of the finest public and commercial monuments of the neoclassical revival in Europe. Monuments symbolic of Scotland's past were grouped together on Carlton Hill in the aspiration to build the Athens of the North. And then under the heading of description in the last paragraph again, the new town is most noteworthy for its planned ensembles rather than individual buildings, where there's a number of notable public buildings, including the Register House, the Royal Scottish Academy, the Assembly Rooms, and the Royal High School, and the monuments on Carlton Hill. So again, in understanding the advice that was given to UNESCO by ICOMOS, in that instance, the importance of Hamilton is expressly identified, as is the broader growth of the city in a conscious attempt to aspire to being the Athens of the North.
Could you identify for me where Hamilton is mentioned specifically in that? Because I haven't picked that up, I apologise.
I'm sorry, it's on electronic page 3, which is under the heading of description on page 80 of the hard copy. Immediately above the management and protection heading, there's a section relating to the new town. Do you see that?
I see it now, yes.
Right, thank you. And lastly on this area, to consider the extent to which the Royal High School makes a fundamental contribution to OUV, can we look please to CD 519, which is volume 22. Now, this is the letter from the Director of UNESCO raising concerns, if I can put it that way, dated 18th December 2015, I'm primarily interested in the technical review, ECOMAS technical review, which is appended to the letter. So if you look please to page 2 of that appendix on page 16, electronically, page 2 in the hard copy. Do you have that? If you look to page 2, in the last paragraph, it should begin the former Royal High School. Do you have that?
Yes, I do, yes.
It's closed in 1968 as one of the truly exceptional historic buildings within WH property. The original World Heritage Nomination dossier recognised it as the noblest monument of the Scottish Revival and perhaps a single building which most justified Edinburgh's epithet, Athens of the North. It is no exaggeration to conclude that this element makes a fundamental contribution to the outstanding universal value of the WH property. So that's the ECOMAS explanation of the extent to which the Royal High School contributes to OUV. They regard it as being fundamental. Is that right?
Yes, I agree with that.
And then they go on to express concerns about the substantive adverse impact on the OUV. That's clear from the recommendation at page 3, where it's recommended, number 1, on the basis of the information received, ECOMAS considers that the current proposals for the old Royal High School would have a major negative impact on the outstanding universal value of the WH property and should not be approved. So drawing that together, Mr. Wright, it's clear that ECOMAS's position, insofar as these proposals are concerned, is that there would be a substantial adverse impact on OUV, and what they have done in the 2015 letter and later 2017 letter is emphasise that the associations in relation to the Age of Enlightenment have not been properly or need to be properly taken into account and properly understood. Is that right?
Sorry, I haven't got the recollection of what is in the ECOMAS letter in order to agree. I imagine that it will refer to cultural values, and if it does, then I accept that.
Now, what I want to do now is then move on to your inquiry report and see how you address the criticisms that are made of your approach in your HIE. Can we look please at paragraph 5113. Might be actually at this point useful to have your precognition also. Paragraph 20, please. Paragraph 20 of your precognition. At paragraph 20, I think what you're doing is summarising issues that are dealt with in more detail in your inquiry report. Essentially, halfway down paragraph 20, you say in your precognition, has been said by those opposed to the penalty scheme that the assessments are purely visual. I think Ms. Denyer makes the point that she says that they were primarily visual, but leaving that small detail apart. But I have prepared evidence of inquiry as to why I believe this is not the case. Direct reference is made to the attributes underpin the statement of OUV in respect to each of the views, which is married with the work carried out in the preparation of parts 1 and 2 of the heritage statement. And this concept of marrying up is dealt with in more detail in your inquiry report. If you look please at, first of all, paragraph 5.1.13, which is on page 19 of your inquiry report. You say here that in section 3 of part 2, which maintains the form of an illustrated gazetteer, a paragraph has been added to conclude each section describing designated and undesignated assets. The purpose is to ensure that the interrelationship between development proposed for the site of the former High School and the heritage asset is identified and understood. The narrative provides a baseline for considering the impact of the proposals in the sections that fall in parts 2 and also part 3 of the heritage statement. So 5113 is referring to part 1 of the HIA for the 2017 proposal. Is that right? And what you're saying is that there's a new section that's been added in relation to the illustrated gazetteer, which helps to then inform the later parts of the document.
I think you made a reference there to part 1, but the reference here is to part 2, which is correct. The gazetteer to which those additional paragraphs are added are in that document. It's in section 3.
So I'm looking at the right document then. If you look at CD 175,
I don't know if I can put in a request that if it's easier and quicker, I think, to refer to the standalone document references rather than the environmental statement, because I'm not familiar with navigating through that particular document. So I think what is being referred to, for the avoidance of doubt, is CD 198.
No, I'm referring to CD 175. I'm sorry, Mr. Wright, but I'm asking the questions in relation to the documents that I've have highlighted and prepared questions in relation to. I appreciate that they're effectively the same document, but because they're the same document, you ought to be very familiar with the documents that you prepared. So if you look please at CD 175.
Sir, with respect, the witness has made a perfectly reasonable request because he's got his papers laid out in front of him, and I really would have hoped my learned friend would be able to accommodate that request. This is a lengthy cross-examination, and I'm not sure I see the difficulty about that.
If it's the same document, then it matters not which one he's looking at. It's the same words, the same pictures. It's just for ease of reference, but I think we can all cover both references. You understand that?
Right, sir. So it's in CD 175 at least. It is electronic page 67. Now, this is the section of the Gazetteer dealing with World Heritage Site, 3.9 World Heritage Site. Do you have that? It's hard copy, page 52.
Yes, I have it now.
Thank you. And if you look to page 53, there's a status comment. And is this the addition that you refer to at paragraph 5.1.13 of your precognition? Oh, sorry, of your inquiry report. insofar as the World Heritage Site is concerned, I appreciate there may be other comments of a similar nature in relation to other heritage assets, but so far as the World Heritage Site is concerned, this is the point that you're trying to make at 5.1.13 of your inquiry report. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. So let's see what this text says then. It says the former Royal High School is recognised as a key building, top of page 53. Former Royal High School is recognised as a key building within the World Heritage Site and is located in a consciously contrived elevated position within it. Set against the backcloth of Carlton Hill, it is of particular prominence. However, as a component within the boundary of the World Heritage Site, the development site is small and is heavily constrained by its boundaries. It is only one of several sites that have been considered for redevelopment in recent years as the strongest evidence of the regeneration of the city and that it is prospering. So insofar as the status of the World Heritage Site is concerned, there's not much to that paragraph, is there?
It is a summary, and it relates to the position of the Royal High School. So it's consistent with the way that it's defined in relation to other assets within that section.
Forgive me, Mr. Wright. In 5.1.13, it might be read as giving the impression that some breakthrough has been arrived at by the addition of these new sections to your analysis. And all I'm seeking to take from you that insofar as this addition is concerned in relation to the World Heritage Site, it amounts to really a couple of sentences and doesn't begin to go into the sort of, or doesn't begin to come close to the sort of analysis that one would expect if one were following the Commons guidelines. Now, I appreciate there'll be other areas of the document which we'll need to look at, and we'll go through that process. But viewing this particular part of the 2017 HIA, which you draw attention to at 5.1.13, I think we can be agreed that this doesn't really add very much, does it?
The purpose of it is not to add very much, but to ensure clarity and its relation to all the designated assets. The thinking about what is conveyed by that is within the section that precedes it, which gives further information about the summary that then follows from that. So it is really taken from that text.
The section that precedes that in relation to the World Heritage Site is the same, is it not, as was featured in the 2015 assessment. Is that right?
I think there are likely to be some changes of that, looking at the two documents side by side, which reflect the increase in knowledge that would have happened between Scheme 1 and Scheme 2. As I indicated, the acquisition of knowledge and its application was a dynamic process, and I think I've made that clear in my evidence. I'd find it highly unlikely that there weren't changes between Schemes 1 and 2, because that's the nature in which the document was prepared.
Just to be clear, Mr. Wright, the version of the document that you're cross-referring to, does that have marginal notes or additional notes incorporated into? Is it a clean copy, or is it highlighted or annotated in any way?
The copy that I have here is annotated.
With your own notes? Well, I think that means it's all the more important then, Mr. Wright, if we could refer to the clean version, which is the environmental statement version.
Well, I wonder why that is, sir. There are many documents here, and the witness is trying his best to answer the questions in, frankly, pretty trying circumstances, in addition to which he's clearly highlighted parts of the document that he regards as important. I simply fail to see why that is a difficulty.
It wouldn't be a difficulty if it was simply highlighting, but it is a difficulty. Potentially, it's something that's not been discussed between the parties, and there's no discussion about this before the inquiry started, but it may be a difficulty if it includes annotations to the document.
Why?
Well, because, sir, Mr. Wright has prepared certainly the approach that HES has taken to preparing their evidence and having access to documentation is not to add in additional annotations or notes of any sort, because the documents speak for themselves, and it's for the witness to explain what their position is in relation to the individual documents. Now, if it's something that you, sirs, are happy about or relaxed about, then clearly I'll take that. That's fine. But speaking personally, it would seem to me it would be better, and it would be better if the witness was referring to the clean version of the documents.
Sir, I simply don't understand that. This is a professional witness, indeed one of the most important witnesses who's clearly done years of research in this. I fail to comprehend why highlighting or making notes, annotations to assist the inquiry or to assist his evidence is a difficulty. If it's being suggested he's doing something underhand, I will very strongly resist that. This witness is trying to assist the inquiry, and I simply don't see what the problem is. This is a planning inquiry, and we're trying to make progress.
If it would help the inquiry trying to assist, it may be observed that the whole of this section was introduced for Scheme 2. It didn't exist for the comparable document for Scheme 1.
I'm happy that we carry on. Mr. Wright can use the notes that he has. I think we're happy with that.
Fine, sir. So in the preamble to that section 3.9, it says many of the qualities that define the OUV of the Old New Towns are highlighted in the above descriptive passages. Now, which descriptive passage are being referred to there? Can you help me with that, please?
Yes, it is the preceding. I beg your pardon. It relates to there are elements that relate to OUV which are in the descriptions of the various buildings and designated assets that are being covered on the previous pages.
So that's within section 3?
It's within section 3, and for instance, where there's a description of, the Carlton scheme, that obviously is something which has importance to both Carlton Hill and to the OUV.
So, for example, if we look at 3.2, there's a section in the Gazetteer in relation to the former Royal High School, is that right?
That's correct. There's also one which relates to St Andrew's House.
Yes, and
as a prominent building. It's trying to draw them out that these are the key subjects or heritage assets that are likely to be affected by the development. That's really the purpose of this.
I follow you, thank you. Now, so in relation to the Royal High School, for example, if you look at that, please, that's electronic page 53. Hard copy page 38. Do you have that?
Yes, I do.
Now, this narrates the elements of that building, but doesn't include any discussion about the extent to which the Royal High School contributes to our understanding of OUV. Is that right?
Yes, it is, but I think it would be rather unhelpful within an illustrated gazetteer, which is a summary of things that are found elsewhere within the documents, to put in the whole of Part 1, which is related to the development of the Royal High School and its significance, and where there's a summary of significance in that. There's a whole history behind that. I think it would be highly inappropriate to try and summarise that in a different sort of way, because the evidence is there already and available to anyone to read.
By that evidence, you're referring to the parts of earlier parts in Part 1, which are the 6 essays that analyse the Hamilton Building and aspects related to the Hamilton Building. Is that what you...
Part 1 of the Heritage Statement is a component part of the planning application, but the whole of that is dedicated, and it's headed Understanding the Site. So the site that's being referred to is the site on which the Royal High School sits, with all its component parts. So that is really why this is summarised briefly here, so as not to take up, but it's so that it's not missed within the assessment of what the heritage assets are, on those that are affected by direct impact and those that are affected by indirect impacts.
So if I'm following you correctly, then the 6 essays are dealing with understanding the site. When the reporters look to the part of that document, they will find references to the Propylaea, to the Enlightenment, to Athens of the North. What they won't find, though, is any direct discussion of how the Hamilton building expressly contributes to the attributes of OUV that are identified in the Statement of Outstanding Universal Value. Is that right?
I cannot say for certain whether it does or not. It would need looking at the Statement of Significance in order to do that. But clearly all of the attributes that relate to how the building is defined are all there within the heritage statement, whether or not it actually refers to the nomination document. It does refer to it as a prominent building within the World Heritage Site. It does refer to it as being of international significance, and also the cultural values of Carlton Hill are also set out very clearly within that document.
All right, but so what you will need to look to then is the summary of significance. Is that right? That's where, if there is any discussion about how all of that feeds into the conveyance of the attributes of the OUV, that's where it should be found. Is that right?
It is one place where it will be found. There may be further discussion of that in Part 3, which is looking at the heritage impact assessment.
Yes, I'm talking about Part 1 for the moment. We'll move into Parts 2 and Part 3 later. So if we look then at the summary of significance, which is page 85, E100. So that's CD 174, sirs, at E100. Do you have that, Mr. Wright?
Yes, I do.
So this is a new heading also, isn't it, in the 2017 assessment? There's no equivalent in the 2015 assessment. Is that right?
No, that is incorrect.
You see there is a heading of cultural identity in the 2015.
I beg your pardon. The cultural identity was added to give greater clarity within. I thought you were referring to the summary of significance being omitted in the 215 scheme, which is not the case.
So this new subheading, cultural identity, says that Thomas Hamilton's Royal High School building is an integral part of the assembly of buildings and monuments placed in Carlton Hill. The monuments on the summit of the hill are inseparable from the association with the renaissance of the Scottish capital's position within the Union and its recognition as a European centre of learning with origins to be found in the ideal of the Golden Age of Enlightenment. The conscious attainment of these aspirations are largely fulfilled in the decade when the former school building was completed. The compelling attraction of the hill for its recreational qualities was recognised at the time when the first new town was first occupied, and enjoyment of it is derived from the carefully considered way in which the monuments are laid out, and so on. In the next paragraph we see reference to the Scottish Acropolis. So what you're doing then is you're building up as you said earlier, you're building up your understanding of the site, and you're identifying these issues as being relevant to the cultural identity expressed by the Hamilton building. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. It may have been in different components of the summary of significance before, but this is brought together in a more understandable and clear way.
But what you're not doing at this stage is assessing what impact there is as a consequence of any development on the expression of these attributes. You're not at this stage linking the two together. Is that right?
No, it's inappropriate to do that. The first thing is to understand the site, and that's in accordance with the accepted policy guidance of the first thing that you do before going on to that. It's very important that you do understand it so that you have that clear baseline of evidence upon which then to start looking at levels of impact.
Fine, so you've built up an understanding of the site, but you're not identifying specific attributes of OUV in a methodological way, in a transparent way as yet, because you say you go on to do that in later parts of the document. Have I followed you correctly?
The attributes of OUV are dealt with late in the third part of the heritage statement here.
So just to be fair then, can we look at part 2 to see the next step in that process? CD175. At E67.
For the avoidance of doubt, this is CD198.
E67. Now this is the gazetteer we looked at a moment ago. If we look above that, please, to section 213, which you will find at beginning on electronic page 48, hard copy page 33.
Sorry, could you give me the reference again?
Yes, sorry, it's section 213 of this document, and it begins on page 32 of the hard copy, page 47 of the electronic copy.
Yes, thank you, I have it.
So this is more of the text that then leads to the gazetteer and statement that we looked at a moment ago. And at this point, I think I'm correct in saying that effectively what's done is that potentially relevant aspects of the UNESCO inscription are set out, then potentially relevant parts of the management plan of 2011 to 2016 are also set out, and that includes clause 3.8, clause 3.10, clause 3.11, and then there's a summary at paragraph 213.8 of what chapter 4 of the management plan seeks to do. Is that correct?
I'm afraid you're going too fast for me. Could we go through that?
Yes, of course. So section 213 is headed up the Old and New Towns of Edinburgh World Heritage Site Management Plans, and the purpose, as I understand it, this part of your assessment is to identify parts of the UNESCO inscription as they are reflected in the management plans which have some potential relevance. So in the following paragraphs, between 213.2 and 213.8, you identify some of the clauses from chapter 3 of the management plan, and then at 213.8 you summarise what chapter 4 is seeking to do. Is that a fair summary of that part of the document?
I believe it is. I believe it is.
So what you're not doing at this stage is identifying all of the potentially relevant attributes from the management plan. It's just simply some of them. And again, what you're not doing is analysing any impact which the development proposals might have upon the expression of those attributes.
And the purpose is simply to set them out so that there is awareness, which is really the basis on which the other parts of this chapter are also set out. There may be omissions in that. I'd be the first to accept that, but it is nevertheless an attempt to do that in a broad way so that they are simply not overlooked when the tests are put into place when judging impact.
So that then leaves us with part 3, which is the HIA itself. Sirs, I don't know whether this would be an appropriate point to have a morning break. I'm happy to go into this document, but it might make sense to
no, if that's a convenient point. Let's break now. Let's come back at 11:30. Thank you.
The statement you've helpfully explained what those parts contain and what they don't contain. Can we look now, please, at part 3? And can we start, please, with the summary of relevant attributes contributing to OUV, which is section 5.3 in document CD 175 at page E152. E152. And it's page 22 of the hard copy document.
Yes, thank you. In anticipation, I'd opened it at that page.
I can tell you know where I'm going.
Are you using CD 199 or 175?
I'm using CD 199 as opposed to 049, which is Scheme 1. So I'm looking at Scheme 2, which I think you are too.
Yes, I think it's most helpful to look at Scheme 2. I don't think that actually there's any difference between the two documents in this respect, because it's simply a setting out a narration of the relevant parts from the management plan. Is that fair?
It's partially fair, but I think there's some further clarification in the 2017 document that isn't in the Scheme 1. It relates primarily to considerations of authenticity and integrity.
I'm simply referring to this section, section 5.3, the summary of the relevant attributes contributing to OEV. That's the focus of my next phase of the questioning.
I would be surprised if there are any changes here, because it is simply listing attributes that are taken from the management plan, which was current at that time.
Indeed. So, unlike part 2, we've got a fuller identification of relevant clauses set out in pages 23 and 24, and also then into 25 in relation to chapter 4 of the management plan. Now, I think, as you explained in your evidence, chapter 3 is essentially a direct quotation from the statement of outstanding universal value, whereas chapter 4 is to some extent an interpretation of those earlier clauses. Is that correct?
Yes, but it needs to be made clear that they're not my interpretation. It's taken from the management plan. They're simply extracted from that. And all that I've done so that the inquiry knows how the two documents relate to one another, because they only appeared as bullet points or without recognition in the management plan, I've simply given them some sort of recognition so that it's easy to follow.
And this brings me to possibly the crux of the matter. Where in part 3 do we find your interpretation of the relevant attributes of the OUV insofar as they are directed to the area under consideration? I appreciate you identify relevant clauses under the viewpoints that we'll come to in a moment, but is there any other section where you do set forth your interpretation of what the statement of OUV amounts to?
I've accepted the values that are set out within the management plan.
Okay, that's a separate question, but it's implicit in that answer that what you've done is accepted the clauses from the management plan and then placed a value on the attributes. I think that's what you've tried to do. Is that correct?
I've taken those into account when the views are considered in terms of levels of impact. But these are simply transferring what is in the management plan into tables so that they can be then adopted as applying those values into each of the views. That's the basis on which it's done.
Yeah. So there is no intermediary stage where you interpret the statement of outstanding universal value, identify what you perceive to be the key attributes and the links that would require to be made between the Royal Hamilton School, any wider cultural or other associations, and expand your interpretation, if we can put it that way, in a more general way. What you then do is go straight to the interpretation of views, identify relevant clauses, and then include your reasoning under each of the relevant viewpoints. Is that the way it works?
Not wholly, because what lies behind this, as I've explained before, are parts 1 and 2 of the Heritage Statement. That informs my understanding of a greater understanding than will be found here, which underpins that, which are then carried forward. So all of these values taken together form part of the assessment and understanding of how impact may be direct or indirect on the assets.
So this is where you go back to the understanding of the site, which is the focus of the exercise in Part 1 of the Heritage Statement.
So parts 1 and 2, that they are combined in terms of the gazetteer that we were referring to before.
Yes, absolutely. But as we established before the break, Mr. Wright, what those earlier parts of the document don't do is what Susan Denyer and others have said they ought to do if they're to be relied upon in Part 3, which is to directly identify, analyse and assess the relevant attributes as you see them, insofar as they need to then be assessed in the Part 3 assessment. That's not what's been done.
But they do appear in each of the views in terms of the reasoning. That's part of the application of my understanding, my wider understanding of the site, which is enhanced beyond the attributes, which comes from the detailed knowledge of the site and its history and its layers of history.
To take an example, Mr. Wright, if you look at 4.8-7 on page 25, the New Town is a series of 18th and 19th century gardens that the result of its neoclassical town planning. They range in size from West Princess Street Gardens and Regent Gardens to the smaller squares and strips of the Rossley Terrace. Collectively known as the New Town Gardens, they are generally placed in visible central locations in New Town plans to create an impression of rust and herb. I'm not exactly sure of the pronunciation, but they make an important picturesque contribution to the character of the area in contrast with the controlled architecture of the surrounding buildings. Now, there's mention made of rust and herb in the gazetteer for the New Town's garden and designed landscape, but am I right in thinking that the concept of rust and herb is not identified or discussed anywhere else in any of the 3 parts of your heritage statement?
No, not specifically, but what I do, there is a section in the gazetteer on the design landscape and understanding that. Whether that mentioned Rus in Urbe or not, I cannot say without looking at it. But the concept of Rus in Urbe is dealt with by those who have experience in those matters in relation to landscape and visual assessment, and that will appear in the environmental assessment. So I think it's important that while understanding the historical background, I shouldn't be taking questions on the landscape values and so forth.
Mr. Wright, I'm simply putting the point to you that the clauses, one of the clauses that you purport to then assess in the viewpoint analysis that you carry out, one of those clauses expressly relates to the concept of rus and herb. And how are these reporters to know whether you took into account that concept at all if you don't discuss it anywhere?
But I have discussed it I haven't discussed the concept of Rus in Urbe, because in a sense what is referred to here, there is a disconnect. I don't know if you're aware of that in what is described here. And if you haven't picked up on that, I'll explain it to you. But what is described here is the gardens as a result of the town planning, which relates primarily, but not exclusively, to the first new town, is what's being referred to here. So a series of classical squares in which, and other squares of the, say, of the Murray Fuse and the way that they were developed, in which this concept of Rus in Urbe is being described here. Carlton Hill is different in character to that, and I'm recognising that in the assessments that I'm carrying out. Whether I refer specifically or not to Rus in Urbe, I'm still aware of what that actually means. And I do take it into account in the assessment.
Well, you say that, Mr. Wright, but and the clause 4.8-7 sometimes appears underneath your tables as being potentially relevant, but there's no discussion anywhere of the concept of Ursa Nurb. And what you've tried to do is draw attention to a disconnect. Just to be clear on this, Mr. Wright, is it your view that the concept of Ursa Nurb is not relevant to the assessment of the attributes of OUV?
No, I'm not claiming that. I'm claiming that it's different to what is being conveyed in this particular passage.
Well, we'll test this further, Mr. Wright, when we come to look at the individual viewpoints. Can we just be clear, please, about other aspects of your design team and their view on Ursa Nurb? Can we look, please, at CD 41 at page 22? CD 41. And it's electronic page 22, hard copy page 43. I'm sorry, Mr. Wright, I don't think you have... Oh, possibly it's just laid out differently. Beg your pardon, yes. It's page 43. Do you have that now? And this is the design and access statement that was prepared by Garth Hoskins of Hoskins Associates, is that correct? In relation to the 2015 scheme.
Yes, to give its proper title, it's by Hoskins Architects rather than by Gareth himself necessarily, just to be clear on that.
Right, but he would take ultimate responsibility for a document that was issued in relation to this project under the name of his firm.
You'd have to put that question to Mr. Gibbs.
All right. In any event, what's said here under the heading of development options appraisal at 4.7, in the bottom paragraph, actually just above that, 5 lines from the end of the paragraph above, it says, it became apparent through the design process, and in particular during the early workshops, that the site could be considered in 2 distinct and equally valid ways: picturesque, romantic, and asymmetrical, or rational, classical, and symmetrical. In responding to the prevailing townscape design philosophy of the day, Hamilton could be said to have composed the classical architectural elements of design in a picturesque way, and he certainly used the juxtaposition of building and landscape to his advantage on the site. In doing this, Hamilton produced a broadly symmetrical classical building to sit in the romantic landscape of Carlton Hill. The subsequently built ancillary buildings are created in an asymmetric composition across the school site, which can be seen as reflecting the overall picturesque setting and maintaining the feeling of Ursa Nurb, the illusion of countryside within the city when approached from the west. So it's certainly the view of Hoskins Associates at that time that this concept is important. It was relied upon in the overall composition, the placing of the building and its relationship with the wider landscape. Now, is that something that you differ from? Do you disagree with the view of Hoskins Associates, or do you accept what's said there?
I accept what is said here, and it's consistent with the views of the landscape architects.
And then, just to be clear then, so far as the attributes of OUV are concerned, since one of those attributes is the juxtaposition between built form and landscape, it also is of relevance when identifying and analysing the attributes of OUV.
Yes, I agree with that.
Thank you. And given that last answer, sir, it's not necessary to take to the documents, but if you look at CD192 at page 6, you'll find further detail on that in relation to Rankin Fraser's views. Right, if I can take you now back to your inquiry report, Mr. Wright, at 5346. Now, at 5346, what I'd like to just be clear on here is what you were relying upon when you carried out your assessment and when you expressed the views that we'll come to analyse in relation to the reasoning, and in particular which information you drew upon. What you say halfway through 5346, a sentence beginning, I would stress, do you see that on the right-hand side? I would stress that the response to each image is based on what is actually seen in the representation of the scheme, in the knowledge that the images have been prepared with care and skill so as to be relied upon as being realistic. However, I was aware in a small number of cases that the viewpoints that have been chosen could not be relied upon either in the focal length adopted, which may have appeared inconsistent, or from the fact that a zoom lens appeared to have been used which had distorted the field of vision. Accordingly, compensation was made for these anomalies in the assessment of the view. I remarked upon this whenever I came across images that were not thought to convey accuracy, for which compensation was made in the analysis. The entries in relation to the two views from Canongate illustrate the point where the two agreed views were not considered to be representative of the experience of the subject for those walking on the Canongate. It should be noted that technical distortions in how views have been photographed have been corrected for the assessment of scheme 2. So, as I read this then, what you are doing is looking at the view that you see in each of the images that we will come to look at in a moment, and unless there's any reason to regard that as being unrealistic, that is what you assess. And if there is any concern over what's in front of the viewer, you specifically draw that to the attention of the reader. Is that correct?
So much as I was aware of it, I would do that, yes.
What also the reporter should be careful with, though, Mr. Wright, is the fact that, as you acknowledge at paragraph 223 of your of your impact assessment, there are higher resolution images that are available that aren't very well reflected in the scale of the document that you have in front of you. Is that correct?
Yes, that has to be the case, and that the document has to be handled in terms of being a file size which the planning portal can cope with. So this is why I made that particular view apparent, so there's no doubt about where the accuracy of the images could be found.
And that means that, for example, sometimes it'd be quite difficult to decipher the extension wings in certain views as they're shown in the Part 3 of the heritage statement, but it's much more obvious if you look at the finer detail, finer resolution images in the visualizations for each of the schemes, in Scheme 1 and Scheme 2.
Yes, in carrying out the assessments of each of the views, I'd be using the same documentation as appears in the environmental statement, rather than appears in this document. This is simply reducing the file size so that there's clear reference to what is being referred to, rather than looking in great detail at the image which is being conveyed. But there's no, apart from the file size, there is no difference in the images, just to make that clear between the two documents.
With the slight caveat that sometimes different photographs are used, one between the other. Sometimes new photographs are taken for the 2017 assessment. They're not always a direct comparison, is that correct?
Sorry, the comparisons I was making was between the heritage impact assessment and environmental statement for both schemes. So it is the case, certainly, that additional views were added in for Scheme 2, which I've addressed. So you have a greater number of views to be assessed for Scheme 2 than you do for Scheme 1.
All right, but the fundamental point that reporters need to be absolutely clear on is that when they come to use your heritage impact assessment, Part 3, and when they're looking at the series of viewpoints, what they also need to do is have regard to the visualizations, because they are the quality images from which it's easier to establish what the visual impact is that's being referred to in the assessment. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
All right. And in relation to those images, am I correct in thinking that whilst we have this document, CD 596, which are visualizations to be viewed flat at a comfortable arm's length, in relation to the visualizations that are included in the environmental statement, none of those are intended to be used in the field, and there's a note to that effect in relation to each of the images.
I'm not an expert on LVA matters, and I think we're drifting into that, and I think that Mr. Van Grieken will provide evidence to the inquiry on that.
But it might be thought important, Mr. Wright, if you've based your assessment on visualizations which are not actually intended to be used as visualizations in the field.
All I can do is work with the information that I have and my knowledge of the site and the many photographs, and by walking around, which are far more than appears in any of the documents which are here, in terms of that understanding of the site and the setting of the various heritage assets within it.
Yes, but I come back to the point that we started this with, which is that ultimately what you're assessing is what's seen in the view, subject to any caveats which you highlight in relation to those views. That's what you've sought to do in your heritage impact assessment. So whilst you have those layers of understanding, when it comes to actually assessing the impact, what you're having regard to is visualizations which were never intended to be used in the field. Is that right?
Sorry. My apologies.
It might help if you gave the answer again, or maybe you need the question again.
I'm sorry, I'll need the question again. I do apologise for that.
So where I think we've got to is that you've carried out your impact assessment by reference to particular views. You've very fairly and properly identified that the person who's reading the document needs to have regard to the higher resolution images which are shown in the visualizations. And the point I'm putting to you now is that those visualizations were never intended to be used in the field. There's a note to that effect in relation to each of the visualizations. That's as contrasted with what we have here in CD 596. Now, I appreciate you may not understand the technical implications of that, because that might be a matter with your expertise. But I think what you've said to the inquiry is that those are the documents that were provided to you by your other members of your team.
That is the case. They were handed to me. I was aware in some cases where there needed to be additional views that were included to represent certainly what I was identifying as more like kinetic sequences of how you experience the city, really so that you're not working from a single viewpoint. But also there will be cases where, because of my awareness of the site and the particular setting of the Royal High School, that sometimes the appearance of the building within that view is only partially within the framed view that is being considered. So I am not just looking at the view, I'm using my knowledge of the full setting of the buildings and how it relates to other things which are not necessarily within that view. It's always a difficulty, obviously, to do that, but I am applying that knowledge to understanding each of the individual views.
So you're using your understanding built up through the different tiers that you've explained, but what you then do is use the viewpoints and the visualizations which are provided to you by members of the team to identify where those potentially relevant attributes may be experienced, and then you use that to assess the impact on those attributes. Is that what you have tried to achieve, at least?
Yes, that's broadly true.
Is there a threshold in your impact assessment for what might be treated as significant? You'll appreciate that in EIA terms that's quite an important concept, because that's what needs to be identified through the EIA process. Your documents are appendices to the environmental statement. They are referred to in the EIA, but am I right in thinking that your heritage impact assessment doesn't identify a threshold for significance as such? Or perhaps it does. Can you explain?
I think it depends on the terminology which is being used. I've tried to align the levels of assessment with what is set out in the ICOMOS documents and with regard to other practice within the United Kingdom. So I may not use the word something which is significant. That certainly is a word that I use in relation to the direct impact of, say, the bedroom wings on the setting and special interest of the listed building, because that is referred to directly in the policy guidance. It's in the HESPs and it's in the managing change guidance. So what I have to do is adapt the terms to the methodology which is being used across the board.
I'm not trying to trip you up here, Mr. I'm simply trying to understand whether you applied a threshold for significance. And I think what you're saying is, insofar as the World Heritage Site impact on attributes conveying OUV is concerned, you didn't apply a cut-off point. In other words, above a certain threshold is significant, below it's not significant. For example, is it your position that moderate and major effects would be treated as significant, or in your view is it more nuanced than that, that actually there are different levels of significance ranging from moderate adverse all the way down to major beneficial?
I think I see what you're meaning. It really has to start from the neutral in either direction, which is accepted in the way that heritage impacts assessments are done. So I'm using that, but also with regard to, I think it's table 3B, which is in the ICOMOS guidelines, using those also. We referred to those earlier. Yes. In terms of looking at those thresholds. So this all comes together, bringing all of these factors into consideration.
Fine, but just to be absolutely clear then, there was no specific threshold for what you treated as significant or insignificant in terms of your impact assessment?
It has to be variable. There are different levels. Okay. Something is really at the highest level. Some things are of less importance. And I use a whole range of factors which help me in identifying that.
All right. Now, if we can then just summarise where I think your impact assessment ultimately got you to, what you have done in your assessment summary for the 2015 scheme, and actually may be helpful just simply to have this before us. It's CD 26, please. be wrong. Reference count.
If I could just be sure that it is CD 049.
It really would be very helpful to have these references for the witness.
It's part 3 of
It would save a lot of time.
It's part 3 of the 2015 assessment.
That's also 049, scheme 1.
I have it here.
And if we go please to electronic page 201, which is hard copy page 105. Do you have that, Mr. Wright? So there's almost like there's a colour coding system being used here, and in Table 1 you set out the summary of the evaluation in relation to impact and cumulative effect. Now, by cumulative effect, do you mean the effect of the impact on the value of the asset, or by cumulative effect are you referring to that plus any other developments which might give rise to a cumulative effect?
Now, just to be clear, it is in relation to the heritage assets which are within the view, rather than looking at the cumulative effect. There are one or two views which were selected particularly, I think, by City of Edinburgh Council, which might have taken into account, for instance, say the Carlton Gate scheme or the St James Centre, which certainly would have had an impact, with St Andrew's House being in some of the views, filling in a gap and then disappearing, and then a scheme emerging of a different... obviously there is a requirement to try and take those cumulative effects into account, but it doesn't mean that here. The meaning is given earlier in the document, which follows the guidance which is set out, just to be clear about that.
That's fine, I just want to be clear about that. But then also, for example, if you look at Waterloo Place, it's the cumulative effect is described as being minor adverse, moderate adverse. And again, just to be clear, does that mean that the impact could be one or the other, or somewhere in between, depending on exactly where you are, or is this a hybrid level of effect? Can you explain that, please?
It's really a hybrid, that it's really set by the tables, and it does. And I think this is where the advantage of the HIA over EIA allows for these nuanced judgments, rather than just absolute impacts. It does allow for that. So this reflects that, and it is standard practice to do it that way with heritage impact assessments.
And what we see then is that the impacts, or effects rather, that are identified in Table 1 are then transposed over into Table 2, where there's a weighting of impact on OUV. And you identify how many are of each category, effectively. Is that the way it works?
Yes, it's simply a summary of what is in the previous table, yeah.
And because each of your assessments is based on a view, it does mean that when one looks at the weighting of impact on OUV, that has a direct influence on what's seen in that Table 2. For example, if you were to take, and I know this isn't a hypothetical example, but if you were to take 100 views, but only a small percentage of those views identified any issue about the attributes of OUV, and then transpose that into the Table 2, the weighting of impact on OEV, that would give a certain result which might not be necessarily reflective of the actual impact on the attributes.
No, but equally, if one's looking at even a single major adverse impact at the bottom of the table, then one would have regard to that, because it might be an absolute key view by which the heritage asset is being seen in terms of OUV, and be of such catastrophic effect that it could then put the status of the World Heritage Site into doubt. So it's a useful table, but it's no more than a table, because it's not really founded upon to any great extent, because there is an explanation later which then analyzes the results and informs the reader as to where I consider the more adverse impacts occur from studying the individual views.
I'm obliged that. So what the reporter shouldn't do is simply look to Table 2 and see, oh well, the balance of effects is towards the green side of the table, therefore in the round everything's okay. Actually, what the reporters will have to do is formulate their own impression as to the level of effects, and if there are moderate or major adverse effects, and they may not agree with you in relation to this, then that may pose an issue about the acceptability of either the 2015 or 2017 scheme. Is that right?
I'd accept that these are matters of professional judgment at the end of the day as to how these are arrived at, given the methodology which is used.
Now, insofar as where you identify potential issues in the 2015 scheme, you identify moderate adverse effects, sometimes of a hybrid nature, at view 044C at Waterloo Place. It's obvious from the Table 1 if you just skim down that. Also at 019C, Canongate Church. Also at 021A, west side of Regent Road. And also at 32B, Carlton Hill. And if we were, probably not necessary to do this right now, Mr. Wright, but if we were to look at the same table in the 2017 assessment, the assessment effect has changed, and the only moderate adverse effect is identified as far as the 2017 proposal is concerned is at viewpoint 019C for Canongate Churchyard. Is that a fair summary of where your assessment has got to?
I think in general terms that is so, and it's really what would be expected, having conducted the exercise in looking in particularly at the west playground and reducing the accommodation which was to be placed there, and the knowledge that this was the area that appeared more often as a reason for a refusal in the final report from the council. So those matters were the intention was to address those as much as was possible.
So it's as expected, I think, is the way you put it in your inquiry report or your assessment. Now, an issue that we touched on yesterday was that considerable design effort was put into achieving notional symmetry in the overall design, and that whilst the bedroom wings are situated on either side of the Hamilton building, that I think we accepted readily yesterday that Hamilton himself didn't envisage any substantial buildings built on the playgrounds adjoining the main building. Your position and the position of your team is that they don't threaten the dominance of the Hamilton building, and in part that's because of the framing effect that we discussed yesterday, because the new wings help to frame the main building. Is that right?
Yes, but it's not related just to that matter solely. It's related to a number of aspects as well.
Okay, but that's one of the aspects, and one of the key aspects that you rely upon.
Yes, that's correct.
And if we see the assessment relating to managing change and the assessment of impacts on the setting of individual monuments in earlier parts of the heritage statement, we can see this framing effect being relied upon as something that gives rise to a beneficial effect in from certain viewpoints. Is that right?
Sorry, is the nature of the question to do with what is set out in Part 1 in terms of understanding?
Well, perhaps we can... You've accepted that one of the aspects that you relied upon is the framing effect, although there are other aspects. Can we test that, please, by beginning to look at the actual assessment? And can we begin, please, with viewpoint 19C at Canongate Churchyard? Now, this is one of the documents, one of the viewpoints, rather, where there is a large-scale visualisation, so it would be helpful to have that, please. CD 596.
So I would obviously stress that these are, this is a document from Mr Van Grieken, who will be giving evidence shortly, or maybe not so shortly at this rate, but it may be helpful to leave these questions to him. I don't know what the questions are going to be, but I simply stress that Mr Van Grieken is giving evidence about this very document.
Can we establish, so if we have moved from Scheme 1 to Scheme 2 now?
Unfortunately, there are two schemes before the reporter, so we're going to have to look at them both, which is going to make it quite difficult in terms of managing the documentation. So what I'm going to try and do is refer to primarily Part 3 of your 2015 heritage statement and Part 3 of your 2017 assessment. However, for the reasons that we discussed earlier, the reporter should also be aware of and have regard to the visualisations that are found in the ES for each of the schemes, and it would also be helpful when understanding the impacts to have this document before you. I appreciate that it was prepared by someone else, but it's helpful in understanding what the impact is. I think we can agree. So there are three principal documents: your heritage statements for each of the proposals plus the visualisations.
For this inquiry, the witnesses will need a bigger table.
Yes.
Can I ask, if it's 19C that you would like me to focus?
Yes, please, in the first instance. Yeah. All right. So I hope everyone now has Part 3 of the heritage statement for both schemes, each scheme rather, plus, where possible to balance and juggle, the visualisations. Now, looking at viewpoint 19C, before we actually deal with the issues, just in terms of the photographs, so this is one of the examples where excuse me, a different photograph was taken from the one that had originally been used in the 2015 scheme. If you compare the images one against the other, it's obvious that they were taken in different light conditions and in fact different time of year as well, by the looks of it. Is that right?
I suspect that the time of year, I can't tell you whether it's autumn or early spring, but they do seem to be similar from that point of view, as opposed to looking at the site with full vegetation.
And is it correct to acknowledge, Mr. Wright, that the lighting conditions are important in understanding what the impact is if one is looking at the visual impact? Understanding, of course, that that's only an illustrative tool and not the purpose of the exercise.
Yes, and I make this clear in the analysis of each of the views where I consider that that is a factor, or could be a factor, or indeed where seasonal changes come into place. I normally recognise that, even in the full knowledge that it's not represented in the view that I am actually looking at.
So, for example, if we compare the 2015 scheme visualisation, now this is a technical matter, but if you can just confirm your understanding, my understanding at least is that the way in which the computer software works is that the lighting conditions as they apply in the photograph are intended to be reflected and used in the visualisation. So, for example, if we look at the 2015 scheme, we can see that the extension wings are reflecting the sunlight, they're quite bright, and essentially they're quite easy to see. Whereas in relation to the 2017 visualisation, they're somewhat darker in tone and don't have the reflection that we can see in the 2017 scheme. Is that also your general understanding of how these visualisations work?
Yes, in general terms, without having particular expertise in that area, that is what I would expect, yes.
So again, the reporters, when they're carrying out their own analysis and understanding just what the visual impact might be, being one element of the assessment needs to be carried out, they have to have regard to how the extension wings might be perceived at different times of the year and in different lighting conditions, as illustrated in the photograph that we have before us in relation to the 2015 scheme. Is that correct?
Yes, I would agree with that, but I suppose what I would have to draw attention to is the comparability of these two images and the purposes for which they were prepared, which may be different for the HIA as opposed to the LVIA, in that it will be apparent to the inquiry that both of the images that are used in 19C reflect a larger part of the foreground and of Lower Colton appear in those images, and the depth of the view is also apparent there, which is cropped in the two images that have been prepared for the LVIA. So I would highlight that they're not wholly comparable. And what I'm assessing is really the position of the impact of the wings within that broader context of the hill, and also the setting and the viewpoint, which is within the kirkyard.
I'm not sure I follow all of that, but are you saying that the images that we have before us for the 2015 and 2017 schemes are not directly comparable for reasons other than the time of year? Are they not taken from the same position?
Sorry if I didn't make that clear. The 2017 and I would expect, I cannot say for certain, but I would expect that the 2017 scheme, the base image, would be the same as for the 2015 scheme 1. But
it's not. That's what I'm establishing with you. It's not the same image.
If I could check.
Sorry, Mr. Mackay, could you clarify exactly which visualisation you're looking at?
I'm looking at Part 3 of the 2015 and 2017 HIAs. In other words, sorry, the HIA for each in relation to viewpoint.
You're not in the visualisations, in other words.
Not at the moment. I'm looking at the images in the heritage impact assessment.
Thanks.
And it's apparent, I think, that they are not the same photographs. They're not the same base image.
I acknowledge that they are different. There is a change between them, yeah.
And the line that I'm pursuing with you is that when the reporters are therefore analysing the 2017 scheme, for example, they have to have regard to the issues of illumination, of lighting, of reflection, and so on, which are more obvious in the image for the 2015 scheme because of the time of year and the lighting conditions in which it was taken. Do you accept that?
So I do really wonder whether these are matters for the landscape witness whose very presence is to speak to these issues. I'm not sure how this witness who's dealing with heritage is qualified in any sense or shape to answer these detailed questions.
I think as far as Mr. Wright has used images prepared by the landscape architects, it's fair game to ask him questions on those. But, Mr. Wright, if you feel unqualified to answer anything that you're being asked, just feel free to say so.
Question, I think, was that the reporters would need to take into account the differences in the time of year and matters such as reflectivity in the extensions that might be different between schemes 1 and 2, and as represented in the LDIA. Am I right in suggesting?
Yes.
Yeah. I don't think I could disagree with that. No.
I didn't think you would, Mr. Wright. Now, a further aspect that we'll have to take into account is the angle of the sun, because if we compare the two images one against the other, we can see that behind the colonnades of the main building in the 2015 image, there's quite heavy shadowing, which is contrasted with the reflective surfaces of the extension wings, particularly the western extension wing. That's something that's more obvious in the 2015 image than it is in the 2017 image. Right? Do you accept that also?
Yes, I accept that. Yeah.
Now, if we look, please, to the relevant clauses identified for each of the assessments, I think they're essentially the same in both versions. If I can take you, it's possibly easy if I refer in the first instance to the 2015 scheme. Do you have that before you? It's the part that headed relevant clauses from OUV.
Could you give me a page to refer to in there?
It's just beneath the image. 19. Page 82 in the 2015 assessment.
Yes, I have.
Yeah. So, relevant clauses from OUV. There are 16 clauses identified, including 8 from the UNESCO inscription, including 3.8. In this description of the view, which is beneath, it's described as the classic view. That's about 5 lines from the foot of that narrative. You see that?
Yes.
Now, given that this is a classic view from the old town, indeed from the historic churchyard on the Royal Mile, towards the primary elevation of the Hamilton building on its raised terrace, and given that also that we are experiencing Carlton Hill, Nelson's Monument, to some extent St Andrew's House, and bearing in mind, Mr. Wright, the overall purpose of the exercise, which is focused on the attributes rather than the view, would you accept that this view displays not just one, but many of the attributes that conveys the OUV of the World Heritage Site?
It conveys a number, but it doesn't convey the greatest number.
Yes, there may be other viewpoints where you, for example, the obvious contrast would be with viewpoint 1 from the castle. And is it because of that there aren't as many as you might experience elsewhere, that you only attribute high value to the asset rather than very high?
Yes, it's also the location of where the viewpoint is within the kirkyard.
Is that for the reason that you identify in the description of view section, where the end of that, in relation to the 2017 scheme, this is page 94, you say the value attributed to this view reflects the fact that the kirkyard is less visited than some other locations, and the view is incidental to the setting of the graveyard in the foreground.
Yes, that's correct.
So in your view, the value of a receptor is affected by the extent to which it is visited. Is that right?
No, not wholly. It's the extent to which it may be valued also.
Well, you're saying the value attributed to this view reflects the fact that the kirkyard is less visited than some other locations, and the view is incidental to the setting of the graveyard in the foreground. So you're taking into account your understanding of the extent to which a particular viewpoint is a popular viewpoint in attributing value. That's what you've done.
It's partially so, but compared with the Canongate, where more people would see the site from that location, I've taken that into account. But it's also the number of, it's the relationship between the Royal High School and other aspects of the hill that are taken into account in terms of how that value is necessarily measured.
But you see, Mr. Wright, does this not highlight the underlying difficulty with your approach? You've placed a value on that receptor, and you've knocked it down a bit because you've taken the position that it's less visited than other viewpoints, and that's affected the valuation that you've given to the asset. Whereas when we looked at the Commerce guidance this morning, the value is attributed by reference to the attributes that are conveyed, not the sensitivity of the visual receptor.
I suppose the easiest way that I could direct you to that is if one looks at view 21A, which has a medium value, but also lists a similar number of attributes in terms of how the OUV is conveyed. So these are factors that are brought into consideration. It is the degree to which a view is representative of those aspects.
So in your approach to the assessment, the value of the receptor is a key aspect, or one of the key aspects that's taken into account in placing a value on the asset. Is that correct?
It's one of the aspects, but it isn't the sole aspect. There are a series of other conditions that are described in the view that are taken into account in arriving at that judgment. And I start from the view that, from the point of view, rather than the explanation of the view, that all things cannot be of equal significance.
But to put this bluntly, Mr. Wright, when the reporters go to the kirkyard at Canongate Church, they're going to be taking in a breathtaking view which sums up what this inquiry is all about. And yet you don't attribute very high value to that experience. And the reason for that is because you focused your assessment on the value of the visual receptor and what's seen in the view, rather than what you should have been doing, which is concentrating on the attributes of OUV.
Can I remind you what the value of the asset is here? It's not medium. It's not down to the extent that you're suggesting. It is high, which reflects the level of the attributes that are reflected here.
To put it another way, Mr. Wright, having regard to the evidence which you gave this morning confirming the economist approach to value, and having regard to what I've just put to you, would you accept now that perhaps you did underestimate the value of that asset and that ought to have been described as very high?
No, I don't accept that, and that is a matter of professional judgment.
Well, is that so, Mr. Wright, when you identified no fewer than 8 attributes from the statement of OUV? This isn't just a question of professional judgment here, is it? You're saying that 8 attributes of OUV can be relevant to the assessment, and many other interpretation clauses taken from the management plan, and that the Royal High School building and Carlton Hill, both of which, and the GDL, both of which you accepted earlier, conveyed OUV. All of that amounts to a value of high, according to this assessment. I'm giving you the opportunity to reassess that assessment and accept what I'm putting to you is that it should have been assessed as very high, if one is doing the exercise in the way in which economists want you to do it.
I don't accept that.
Did you have assistance in writing the text for the assessments from someone who was versed in visual impact assessment?
Not directly, excuse me, not directly in terms of writing the text, which is by me alone, but the assessments, as I think I've given evidence to that already, was done by a multi-professional team, so that when the visualizations were coming forward for the scheme, the team would sit together and form opinions on how the impact might be read, so that there was a common view. But that is not to suggest to the inquiry that if the LVIA assessment were different to the assessment that I'm doing, that would be something that would come out in that process.
Just be clear then, as a consequence of those discussions amongst the design team and hearing what the landscape architect would have had to say about visual impact, are you saying that assisted you in formulating the value that should be attached to each of the viewpoints when we go through the assessment?
It would certainly assist with that. It would give greater understanding of the wider considerations that have to be brought to bear when forming decisions on impact.
All right, that takes me then to the reasoning part of your assessment in relation to this view. Now, to deal with, first of all, the 2015 scheme, and we'll look at the 2017 in a moment. In the reasoning for the 2015 scheme, you say the angling of the new wings and the modelling of elevations while ensuring the principal facade of the former Royal High School building's primacy suggests in this view that some issues over the quantum of accommodation which is required within the new wings remain. And I take it that was a factor in you assessing the level of impact as moderate.
Yes, that's correct.
And did you also factor into the equation the impact on the setting of the Royal High School because of the issues with scale caused by the quantum accommodation?
Yes, I would have done that, and that would have also related to the exercise carried out in Part 2 when that matter was also examined.
And were there also issues taken into account in relation to the setting of the Nelson's Monument and St Andrew's House?
Yes, there were.
Now, the rest of the text and reasoning, there's no discussion there, is there, about individual attributes of OUV and how they've been impacted upon? That's clear from that text, that what you're not doing is setting out how each of the relevant clauses that you've previously identified are actually affected by this impact.
No, but they are taken into account in making the assessment.
Well,
more to the point, they're not ignored.
Yes, but given the advice from Economos as to the whole purpose of the exercise that we looked at this morning, and the need to understand what the attributes are, how they're relevant at an individual location, and how they're impacted upon, the reasoning here really doesn't assist us with any of that, does it?
I beg to differ. I believe it does. There are elements of this that refer to the monuments which are most affected and how the scheme proposals might have an impact upon them.
Well, what about on the vitally important cultural associations, the political, social, all of those intangible assets that are relevant and can be experienced from this particular viewpoint? What about those? They're not discussed in any way here, are they?
They may not be discussed, but they are taken into account, and I'd find it quite extraordinary, having gone to the trouble of all that I've gone to in understanding the site and in selecting various attributes from the management plan, then to ignore all of that in the assessment. I have to assure you that they were taken into account.
Well, so you say, Mr. Wright, but your reasoning isn't set out here. There's no explanation at all in relation to those matters. And that, I emphasise and put to you again, is the whole purpose of the exercise.
No, but they have been taken into account, I assure you.
The 2017 scheme, again, is identifying a minor and moderate adverse effect. So the level of effect hasn't reduced as a consequence of the reduction in scale of the bedroom wings. There's still a moderate or minor adverse effect. Is that right?
Yes, I still hold that view.
And although you, in the reasoning section, say that the issues aren't as bad as they were with the 2015 position, there are still issues related to the setting of the Royal High School building and Nelson's Monument, which have not been completely successfully dealt with, hence the reason that there's a minor to moderate adverse effect. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm adopting a cautious approach on this.
The difficulty for you, though, Mr. Wright, is that this is one of the key viewpoints from which the framing effect is most obvious, isn't it? Particularly in mid-distance views. It's very obvious that how the building is, and the relationship between the building and the extension wings and the framing effect. This is one of the locations where that's most obvious.
Yes, but I have to point out it's not a true elevation because of the low position of the viewpoint. And the comparable viewpoint, which is found from Queen's Drive, even though it is at some distance, nonetheless I think is probably more representative of that because it is elevated to the point that the angling of the wings, which is represented in this particular viewpoint, is not quite so apparent in that. It's much closer to a true elevation.
Yeah. Now, if we looked at the elevation drawings, we would see the framing effect very clearly. In fact, you're at some pains to criticise Mr. Robb for what you assume as being his erroneous approach of basing his opinion on those elevation drawings rather than a proper appreciation of all of the information. Now, if we look at the elevation drawings showing the south elevation, that framing effect is even more obvious, isn't it?
Which is no more than you would expect, because the two-dimensional elevation drawings will simply show something which is how the building appears, and I cannot say. I think it's really evidence for Mr. Gibb of Hoskins as to how the scheme is represented, as to whether it is. I can't say, and I do not know in those drawings whether it is a true elevation or one where I forgot what the term is that's used architecturally for elevations that are, is it exploded, is it, where
Okay, well, you mentioned the view from Queen's Drive, so let's explore that in relation to the impact in elevation. If you look, please, at view 009A, Queen's Drive.
Sorry, which document are you in now?
It's the same document, sir, it's just a different viewpoint. Viewpoint 009A. For each of the heritage impact assessments. Now, we'll come to your assessment in a moment, but just before we have this before us, could we see first of all that in the relevant clauses from OUV, you don't identify clause 3.8 as being relevant, nor do you identify clause 4.8-7. Does that mean that you've left them out of account on this occasion? Or do you also, or essentially is there an error in the section dealing with the relevant clauses from OUV?
I'm happy to accept that 3.8 would be material consideration. The problem that I have is that Thomas Hamilton's Royal High School appears and disappears in the respective management plans. And had it been highlighted as something here which was an attribute, then I think this most certainly would have appeared rather than looking at other key buildings.
Now, Mr. Wright, I spent some considerable time with you identifying the importance of Thomas Hamilton's building, despite it not being mentioned in some of the documents, but certainly emphasised in others. Are you suggesting that it's been omitted from this particular viewpoint because in some way it's not very important?
Absolutely not. Otherwise, the value of the view would be different to what I've shown.
Yes. Again, emphasising that what you're doing is placing a value on the view, not the attributes. That's the same point, isn't it?
No, let's be clear about this. I'm placing a value of the attributes within the view.
Right. So you acknowledge then that there is an error, and indeed I have to put it to you, a fundamental error in your assessment in relation to this particular viewpoint, because clause 3.8 has not been taken into account.
I'd find it quite extraordinary that I'd be looking at this view without considering the importance of the Royal High School within the setting of Carlton Hill as being the primary issue to be assessed here in terms of the impact on the setting of that building and also on OUV, accepting that it is an important building. I would say it's more an omission in the terms of the numbers that are being represented here, rather than a deliberate omission.
So then is 4.8-7, the concept of Rus and Herb, Newtown Gardens, is that also an omission? Should that also be included?
I would agree that could be added to that list in this particular instance.
Now, in relation to the 2015 scheme, about 5 lines from the foot of the reasoning section, you say, in this view, the angle profile of the new wings is not registered to the same extent as in other views, and the quantum of accommodation required within each of the wings remains a slight issue. Now, looking at the visualisation that we have, I take you would accept that it's a matter of judgment as to whether that's a slight issue or something more than a slight issue.
I'm having trouble finding where the specific words. Is it Scheme 1 or Scheme 2?
Scheme 1, under the heading of reasoning, about
Page 55.
4 or 5 lines. Page
55 in the hard copy, I think.
obliged.
Consider that reasonable.
Yes, because if we're looking at the attributes that are being conveyed and understanding the impact on those attributes, we can see, for example, that in the 2015 scheme, the height of the building is above the ridge line of the main temple on both sides of the building. For example, we see that, don't we? I'm looking at the visualization for the 2015 scheme.
Yes, and that's reflected in the
adverse.
in the adverse
yes.
impact. Yeah.
So again, the framing effect is still not beneficial. It's actually adverse as viewed from this particular location.
It may not be the framing effect to which you're referring, but it may also be the impact on the monuments on the hill and disturbing that setting from this particular viewpoint.
And so the issue then is whether whether you're correct to describe any issue with accommodation, the quantum accommodation being a slight issue, or perhaps in the views of others something more than a slight issue in relation to the 2015 scheme, because you readily accept there are issues in relation to the setting of the Royal High School, Nelson's Monument and the National Monument.
Yes, I have identified that. There is a slight difference that you also may see between the depth of view between the 2017 and the 2015 schemes.
Yes, which makes it difficult to draw a direct comparison, doesn't it? Because it looks like either the photo's taken from a different position or perhaps using a different focal length. I'm not sure which, but they're not directly comparable images, are they?
No, my understanding is that the later image, the 2017, has been corrected to be more in accordance with the LPIA guidelines. But again, I'm no expert on that. I'm just responding to what it is I'm perceiving within what I've been given there.
All right, but as with the first image, again, when the reporters have access to the visualizations, albeit with the caveat that we identified earlier, they may take a different view as to the level of impact, and they may disagree with your assessment that the impact has dropped from adverse to beneficial.
Yes, I fully accept that.
Sir, I'm wondering whether this might be an appropriate point to break for lunch. I know it's slightly before 1 o'clock, but I think it would be beneficial to me to review whether I need to go into the extent to which I need to look at other images given the answers I've received this morning.
Yeah, that's very helpful, thank you. Yes, we'll break now for lunch and we'll come back at, it's only 10 to, we'll come back at 2 o'clock anyway. Thank you.